Most people misunderstand laziness because they confuse it with tiredness, lack of resources, or bad circumstances, but laziness is rarely about energy and almost never about ability. It is a quiet internal decision that happens long before any action is taken, a decision that says delaying is safer than committing, comfort is easier than growth, and avoidance is better than responsibility. Every single day, life presents moments where you already know what needs to be done, yet you hesitate. That hesitation is not accidental. It is the mind choosing familiarity over progress. The danger is that this decision feels harmless in the moment, but when repeated, it becomes a pattern, and patterns shape character, direction, and ultimately destiny. Laziness grows strongest when clarity is missing. When a person does not clearly see where they are going, there is no urgency to move. The mind drifts because there is nothing pulling it forward. Without a definite vision, effort feels meaningless and action feels optional. People say they lack motivation, but motivation is born from direction. When you know exactly what you want and why it matters, action becomes less negotiable. Laziness thrives in confusion, in vague goals, and in undefined dreams because the mind cannot commit to something it cannot see clearly. Purpose also plays a critical role. When purpose is weak, excuses grow strong. A person with a shallow reason for action will abandon it at the first sign of discomfort. Laziness steps in the moment. Effort feels inconvenient because there is no deep emotional connection to the outcome. Strong purpose creates inner pressure, a feeling that not acting is more painful than acting. Without that pressure, the mind constantly searches for reasons to slow down, delay, or quit. And those reasons always sound logical because the brain is designed to conserve energy and avoid risk. Emotional avoidance is another silent contributor. Many people are not lazy. They are avoiding uncomfortable feelings. Action often brings uncertainty, potential failure, or exposure to judgment. And the mind associates these emotions with danger. Instead of facing them, it chooses distraction. Scrolling, sleeping, procrastinating, or overplanning become escape routes. Laziness becomes a mask for fear. It is easier to label oneself as lazy than to admit being afraid of not being good enough, afraid of failing publicly, or afraid of discovering untapped potential that demands more responsibility. Laziness is reinforced by repetition. The first time you delay, there is discomfort. The second time, it feels familiar. The third time, it feels normal. Eventually, it becomes an identity. And you start saying things like, that's just how I am, or I work better under pressure, not realizing that these are rationalizations protecting a habit. The mind learns what you repeatedly allow. Every postponed task trains the brain to associate relief with avoidance, strengthening the behavior. Over time, laziness stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a trait, even though it began as a series of small decisions. Another overlooked factor is the absence of personal standards. When standards are low, laziness has room to grow. If you do not demand excellence from yourself, mediocrity feels acceptable. The mind always adjusts to the level of expectation placed upon it. When there is no internal rule for discipline, effort becomes conditional on mood. High standards remove that negotiation. They establish a baseline of behavior that does not change based on feelings, weather, or circumstances. And without them, the mind defaults to comfort. Laziness is also encouraged by a culture that glorifies ease and instant gratification. When everything is designed to be fast, effortless, and convenient, effort feels abnormal. The brain becomes accustomed to quick rewards and minimal resistance, making sustained focus feel uncomfortable. When real work demands patience and consistency, the mind rebels. Laziness is not weakness, it is conditioning. The environment trains the brain to expect pleasure without effort, and when effort is required, resistance appears. The most dangerous part is how harmless laziness looks in the beginning. It whispers, not shouts. It says you can start tomorrow, you deserve a break, or one day won't matter. But life is not changed by single dramatic actions. It is shaped by repeated daily choices. What you do consistently becomes who you are. Laziness is the slow erosion of potential, happening quietly while you believe you still have time. Negative feelings are often misunderstood because people treat them as enemies that must be eliminated, when in reality, they are signals, temporary emotional states that arise in response to thoughts, memories, and expectations. Fear, doubt, frustration, anxiety, and sadness are not signs of weakness. They are part of the human experience. The real danger begins when a person allows these feelings to dictate behavior. The moment emotions take control of action, life starts shrinking. Opportunities are avoided, potential remains unused, and progress slows to a halt. Not because the person is incapable, but because they have handed authority over to emotions that were never meant to lead. Most people live as if their feelings are commands rather than suggestions. When they feel tired, they rest. When they feel afraid, they retreat. When they feel unmotivated, they stop. This pattern trains the mind to believe that action is only acceptable under ideal emotional conditions. The problem is that those conditions rarely exist. Waiting to feel confident before acting creates a cycle of inaction. Because confidence is not a prerequisite for action, it is a result of it. Negative feelings lose their intensity when challenged by movement, but they grow stronger when obeyed. Fear is one of the most powerful negative emotions, not because it is strong, but because it is convincing. It speaks in logical sentences, predicting failure, embarrassment, loss, and rejection. The mind listens because fear appears to protect, but its real function is to keep things familiar. Fear prefers comfort over growth, known pain over unknown possibility. Every time you obey fear, you reinforce its authority. The next time it appears, it feels more justified, more reasonable, and harder to ignore. Doubt operates in a similar way. It questions your ability, your readiness, and your worth. It points to past failures and uses them as evidence that you should hesitate. Doubt does not need proof, it only needs attention. The more you analyze it, the more convincing it becomes. Many people think they need to remove doubt before they act, but doubt fades through evidence, and evidence is created by action. When you act in spite of doubt, you weaken its influence. When you wait for doubt to disappear, you allow it to grow roots. Frustration and overwhelm often arise when expectations are unrealistic or progress feels slow. These feelings make people quit too early because they mistake discomfort for failure. Growth is uncomfortable by nature. Learning stretches the mind, effort challenges identity, and change disrupts routine. Negative feelings often appear when something is working, not when it is failing. Interpreting these emotions as signs to stop is a misunderstanding that costs people years of progress. Another hidden danger is emotional identification. When someone says, "I am anxious" or "I am unmotivated," they merge their identity with a temporary state. Feelings pass, but identity stays. When you identify with a negative emotion, you unconsciously protect it because it becomes part of how you see yourself. Separating who you are from what you feel creates freedom. You are not fear. You are experiencing fear. You are not doubt. You are noticing doubt. That separation restores choice. Negative feelings are amplified by stillness. When the body is inactive, the mind has more space to overthink. Thoughts loop, scenarios multiply, and emotions intensify. Movement disrupts this cycle. Physical action changes mental state. Small actions, even imperfect ones, signal the brain that progress is happening, and that signal reduces emotional intensity. This is why people often feel better after doing something productive, even if it was difficult. Discipline is the skill that breaks emotional obedience. Discipline is not harshness. It is self-leadership. It means acting according to intention rather than impulse. When discipline is practiced consistently, the mind learns that feelings do not determine behavior. Over time, negative emotions still appear, but they lose their power to stop you. They become background noise instead of roadblocks. The cost of emotional obedience is invisible at first. No one sees the opportunities you avoided, the conversations you never had, the skills you never developed. But over time, those invisible losses accumulate into regret. Mastery of life does not come from eliminating negative feelings. It comes from moving forward with them present. The ability to act while uncomfortable is the dividing line between stagnation and growth. Most people wait for a feeling to arrive before they take action, believing motivation is something that appears first and then produces results. But this belief quietly keeps them trapped. Motivation is not the cause of action, it is the consequence of it. The moment discipline becomes non-negotiable, life begins to change because action no longer depends on mood, circumstances, or emotional comfort. Discipline is the decision to act regardless of internal resistance, and once that decision is made, consistency becomes possible. When discipline is optional, excuses feel reasonable. The mind searches for justification to delay effort, and it always finds one. There will always be a reason to wait, rest, or postpone. When discipline is non-negotiable, those conversations end. The question is no longer whether you feel like doing the work, but whether the work is required, and that shift alone eliminates most inner conflict. Discipline removes debate. Debate drains energy. Action restores it. The brain is designed to follow patterns. When you repeatedly act only when you feel motivated, the brain learns that effort is conditional. When you act consistently regardless of feeling, the brain adapts and begins to support the behavior. What once felt difficult becomes routine. This is not willpower. It is conditioning. Discipline trains the mind to cooperate instead of resist. Over time, resistance weakens because the brain no longer expects comfort as a prerequisite for action. Small disciplined actions create momentum. Momentum is powerful because it reduces the effort needed to continue. One completed task leads to another, not through force, but through flow. The hardest part is always the beginning because you are moving against inertia. Once movement starts, the energy required decreases. Discipline gets you started. Momentum keeps you going. This is why waiting for motivation is ineffective. Motivation often appears after progress is already underway. Discipline also builds self-trust. Every time you do what you said you would do, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. Confidence is not built through affirmations or positive thinking. It is built through kept promises. When you repeatedly break commitments to yourself, self-belief erodes. When you honor them, self-respect grows. Discipline is a vote for the identity you are creating, and identity determines long-term behavior more than any short-term emotion. Another reason discipline is transformative is that it creates structure. Structure reduces decision fatigue. When your day is built around non-negotiable actions, there is less room for overthinking. You do not waste mental energy deciding whether to act. You simply act because it is part of who you are. Structure turns effort into habit, and habits operate with minimal resistance. This frees mental space for creativity, focus, and higher-level thinking. Discipline exposes hidden potential. Many people underestimate themselves because they have never experienced what consistent effort feels like. Occasional bursts of motivation do not reveal true capacity. Only sustained discipline does. When you show up daily, even imperfectly, skills compound, confidence grows, and capability expands. Discipline is the bridge between potential and performance, and without it, potential remains theoretical. Emotions begin to change once discipline is established. Action influences feeling more than feeling influences action. When you move your body, engage your mind, and make progress, emotional state improves as a byproduct. Energy increases, clarity sharpens, and optimism grows. Discipline does not suppress emotion. It reshapes it. Instead of being controlled by mood, mood becomes responsive to action. Life becomes predictable in the best way when discipline is non-negotiable. Results stop being accidental. Progress stops depending on inspiration. Success becomes a process rather than a hope. Discipline creates reliability, and reliability creates results. Over time, the gap between who you are and who you want to be narrows, not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger, more focused, and more consistent. The mind is the most powerful tool a person possesses, yet it is also the most dangerous when left unmanaged. Every action begins as a thought, and every habit is first rehearsed in the mind long before it appears in behavior. When you do not consciously direct your thoughts, they operate on autopilot, shaped by past experiences, conditioning, and emotional reactions. In that state, the mind does not work in your favor. It works to preserve comfort, familiarity, and safety, even when those things are limiting your growth. Thoughts repeat themselves when they are not challenged. A single negative idea left unchecked becomes a belief, and beliefs shape perception. Once perception is shaped, reality appears to confirm it. This creates a closed loop where the mind gathers evidence to support what it already believes. If you believe you are lazy, the mind will notice every moment of inaction and ignore moments of effort. If you believe success is difficult, the mind will highlight obstacles and minimize opportunities. Without conscious command, the mind becomes a filter that distorts reality rather than reflecting it accurately. Mastery of the mind begins with awareness. You cannot change what you do not observe. Many people live inside their thoughts without realizing they are thinking. They react automatically to internal dialogue as if it were fact. Awareness creates separation. The moment you notice a thought, it loses some of its power. You move from being inside the thought to observing it. This observation restores choice. You may not control which thoughts appear, but you can control which ones you entertain, repeat, and act upon. Language plays a crucial role in mental control. The words you use internally shape emotional response and behavior. Repeated phrases become instructions to the subconscious. When the inner dialogue is filled with limitation, criticism, and doubt, the mind follows those instructions faithfully. Changing internal language is not about pretending or denying reality. It is about issuing clear commands aligned with intention. The mind responds to clarity and repetition. What you tell yourself consistently becomes a program that directs action. Visualization is another powerful tool of mental command. The mind does not distinguish clearly between imagined experience and real experience. When you repeatedly visualize yourself acting with discipline, confidence, and focus, the brain builds familiarity with those behaviors. Familiarity reduces resistance. This is why athletes rehearse mentally before performance. They are conditioning the mind to accept success as normal. Without visualization, the mind rehearses failure by default, replaying past mistakes and future fears. Emotional responses are often triggered by interpretation, not events themselves. Two people can experience the same situation and feel completely different emotions because their minds interpret it differently. When you command your mind, you take control of interpretation. Challenges become information instead of threats. Discomfort becomes a sign of growth instead of danger. This shift changes emotional response without changing circumstances. Emotional mastery is not suppression, it is reframing. Habits of thought are built through repetition. Just as physical habits form through repeated action, mental habits form through repeated thinking. If negative thought patterns have existed for years, they will not disappear instantly. Consistent redirection is required. Each time you interrupt a limiting thought and replace it with a constructive one, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. Over time, the mind begins to default to supportive thoughts instead of sabotaging ones. If the mind is not given direction, it seeks stimulation and comfort. It drifts toward distraction, comparison, and worry. Commanding the mind means giving it purposeful work. Focused goals, structured routines, and intentional reflection provide the mind with direction. A directed mind is calmer, more efficient, and less reactive. Chaos in life often reflects chaos in thought. Becoming a master of the mind is not a one-time achievement. It is a daily practice. Every day presents moments where thoughts attempt to lead behavior. In those moments, you either follow them unconsciously or choose deliberately. That choice determines whether you lead your life or react to it, whether you build intentionally or drift passively, whether your potential is expressed or imprisoned within unexamined thought patterns.